Let's talk about Shadow Hunter real quick. The Shadow Hunter has two builds, right? Demonic Impulse and Perfect Suppression. Most people do Demonic Impulse build. These are the engravements you usually have, the stats you have. So if you have a lot of specialization, right? The stats specify that your transformation time is longer. Your damage that you do while transform is much higher. Every time you do your skills, your purple skills, you gain much more meter. So from this point on, you would focus on getting the specialization stats first. I went from crit to swiftness because I changed my engravement recently. So I turned it to 3/5s. You would need to get class engravement first for Demonic Impulse, right? So let's say you're an NA, you would aim for level 3 of this first. Why? Because this gives 30% crit rate when you're transformed. So when you have 30% crit rate, you would still crit as much as you can, even if you have a high specialization. So when you're in the beginning, you would aim for something like Raid Leader. What Raid Leader does is the more movement speed you have, the more damage you do. If you transform in a Demonic Impulse, you have a movement speed boost. So this engravement kind of works together. And afterwards, you would add something like the Spirit Absorption, because Spirit Absorption increases attack speed and movement speed. It kind of works together at the Raid Leader. So the 3/3s would be Demonic Impulse engravement, Raid Leader, and Spirit Absorption. Or if you can have like a premium universal engravement called Grudge, you can have Grudge, Demonic Impulse, and Raid Leader. Those are options too. So you notice I have Sharp Blunt and Adrenaline. These engravements are maybe more of a later game engravements that you should get, because these are more of a cherry on top that makes your character stronger. It only makes sense if you have more than three 3/3s. But in NA, it's really hard to get more than 3/3s. The realistic is 3. 2/3s or 2/3s and a 1 or a 3/3. The primary engravements that you should get is something like Demonic Impulse and Raid Leader, or Demonic Impulse and Grudge, or Demonic Impulse and Grudge and maybe 1 or 2 or much as you can on Spirit Absorption, because it helps out. And while you're working on this engravement at the same time, you gotta increase as much specialization as I can. So this one, mine's a little bit cheaper because the quality of the accessory, this one is green because it was too expensive. This one alone was like 30,000 gold and rest were like a 10,000 ish. You would want 1800 specialization, but I couldn't get it, but it's still okay. It's not as bad. It just takes a little tad longer to transform. And you notice here I have it on swiftness because I have this thing called Adrenaline. What Adrenaline does is it gives you a crit rate of 15%. So, okay, since I'm gonna have crit rate covered at Adrenaline, I don't really need crit stats. So I'm gonna put more on swiftness so that I can move faster, which in result, I will have the full effectiveness in Raid Leader. So you can calculate it that way as well. That's how you usually theory craft in this game. On a side note, the swiftness and Adrenaline build doesn't work in NA because, again, you don't have enough nodes. So since you're limited to 3/3s or 2/3s or 3s and a 1, you usually go on your substat on crit with high specialization. So let's summarize. What engravement should you get for Demonic Impulse? First, combat stats. It needs to be high on specialization as much as you can, and crit on substat. You cannot do swiftness one because it won't work. And as for main most important engravement, you need to get Demonic Impulse at level 3. So your best combination of engravements for NA endgame would be Demonic Impulse, Raid Leader, Grudge, and Spirit Absorption. Let's go over to skills. So my last videos, people were confused because they don't have 414 skill points as I do. I don't know how much most people have. Let's think of the very end build first and then think about more of a realistic build. So usually you use Demonic Slash because on these tripods, because you use this skill to maneuver yourself when you're not transformed. When you're not transformed, you're really weak. So it's really crucial for you to move around as fast as you can. And this enables you dash twice. And you do the thrust impact. Usually people use it because at the very end, there's a tripod that gives you additional gauge if you level it up. Sometimes when you use all your skills, you can miss one. And then you go, oh shit, I missed one. Instead of waiting for your cooldown, you have another safe bet to use to safely transform. Because in Demonic Impulse build, your goal is to transform as much as you can and transform as fast as you can so that you don't die. And then going through the purple ones, usually the purple ones are leveled based on amount of gauge gains. Demon Visions are number 1 skill that you're supposed to utilize. It doesn't matter from after 10 because it only increases damage. This particular skill fills the gauge the most with the proper tripod, and you put the best rune in there. And the second one is Demon Grab, which is you put the second best rune with you have the tripod of increasing gauge gain. You have this gauge gain tripod here and then gauge gain tripod here. So let's go from the top. So you have the Genocide. You notice there's a gauge gain passive that you can level up. You have a little bit of super armor so that you don't get hit, and then you base it on damage as well, right? And then you have the counter. Counter, you want some form of super armor so that you don't get hit while you're countering, because sometimes when you're trying to counter and you get hit, it's not a good result. Usually when you see a counter skill, they put some form of super armor on top of it. This one increases the stagger by middle-ish from low. This one's a faster animation, and then there's an additional animation afterwards, so both hits are counted as a counter, so it's pretty good. As I talked Demon Vision before, the most gauge gainer skill. It makes the skill longer, therefore you gain more gauge. So you base it on that, so you put the second tripod, and that would be the third one, which increases your gauge gain. And then the third one would be, instead of hold, you instantaneously cast, which is very good. Now you have your Demon Grab. This one people usually use on the cast speed. I have it on cooldown as well, but it was about the same. It's a personal preference here. And then second tripod, obviously the one that gains the most gauge. And then this turns into a projectile, so it's easier to land. So here you have Howl. Howl is very good. You obviously use the faster cast, because the reason why you want to do a faster cast is because some of these castings are very slow, and while you're casting it and you get hit, you can't gain gauges, and then you get flown off, or you can actually die too. So faster casting is actually pretty good for some of these characters, especially like Shadowhunter, because they need to be quick. First tripod from the level 1. The additional gauge gain tripod is the most important ones. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the moment. So you have that here. And then the last one, this is a tripod that gives synergy to your party. It says if you attack them, you get 12% additional damage to yourself and your party. The problem is it only lasts 6 seconds, and it only happens when you're not transformed. So it's kind of useless, but it kind of helps the team as well. So most people take this instead. And then you have lastly you have Decimate. Decimate is just your last attack instead of using Pierce Zone. That's about it. You use Decimate for, fast attack, and then you just fill up your damage a little bit. And this thing does 2 ticks, and it's very quick, so it's also good as well. So your Wealth Rune is on these sections, because again, this gives the most, and then these two gives the second most. So you put the Wealth Rune there, so you get the best efficiency. And then the rest of the rune is equipped on your transformation skills, as you notice here. So I have the Berserk, and then you have the Bleed, and then you have the Gale Wind runes, so that you can move faster and attack faster. The ultimate, you don't use the first one. Most uses the Ruin one, because this particular skill does a lot of damage when you're transformed. However, going back to another topic is that if you don't have enough skill points and don't have enough tripods, what's going to happen is you might not be able to level these many skills. So if I can simulate it, you would focus on getting these 3 skills first. The Demon Vision, Demon Grab, and Howling, because it gives the most gauge. So let me drop this off, and you would drop Rising Claw first, because you don't really need the last one. This would still be used as a counter. You can even put it to level 4. To save more skill points. You would focus on getting level 10 of all of these skills so that you can enable gauge gains. If you still don't have enough skills, you would put down on Thrust Impact into 7 or 4, and Demonic Slash into maybe 7 or 4. If you still don't have skills, so skill points to utilize, I would start putting points away on something like Decimate to 7. These are more of a damage skill, and this doesn't have the tripod that increases your orb gain. The question of what do I carve off and what do I add in would be your main mandatory stuff would be the orb gainers to the tripod that enables higher gauge gain. And then you would add in additional stuff such as your counter, and then you would add in another sub orb gain, which is a Thrust Impact, and then put in some more on Demonic Slash as well. Lastly, totally forgot. This particular awakening, you use this instead of this if you are lacking in the gauge, right? This particular awakening gives you a lot of transformation gauge. When you lack specialization, when you lack the tripods, if you're not gaining enough gauge, right, you would use this awakening instead of the other, because your priority is to transform fast instead of doing damage. But when later on, as your character progresses and you have the Wealth runes and you have the tripods, you'll be able to use the second skill and then do more damage overall. Okay, cool. I think that covers it.